Hey guys, in today's video, I'll show you exactly what you missed out on if you didn't attend the webinar between Unlock Clay and Girls Who Clay. And essentially, it's going to walk you through exactly everything that you need to know in order to simplify Clay when it comes to either implementing it for your business or learning Clay yourself. So essentially, the first thing to do is to always talk about use cases and to remind yourself of all the powerful ways to use Clay. Now, essentially, what I mean by that is that the first thing you need to remember is what Clay actually is, because this is the first thing that most people get super wrong. Clay is just the bridge between the input and the output. Nothing more complicated than that. All that means is that the inputs, things like email finders like Apollo, Prospeo, maybe Sales Navigator leads, leads from your CRM, from a CSV, maybe some fancy webhooks or APIs delivering that data. And this is just the inputs. You cannot, yes, you can use Clay technically to generate those inputs, but it's not recommended because it's not good for actually scaling it, because it will cost you a lot of Clay credits and it'll be really expensive, right? For that reason, you only can use Clay when you have one of those inputs sorted, right? Then what can Clay do for you? It can research companies, you can research people, it can help you qualify those people for or companies for ICP, you can build lists, you can find specific signals, then personalize that, and for example, have a fully generated email template as an example, right? Now, this is super important because Clay, as I already mentioned, and I want to drill this into you, that it's just the input, it's just the bridge between the input and the output. And then finally, the output will be email sequencing, LinkedIn sequencing, adding leads to a database, a CRM, an Excel sheet, and I'm sure you can read the rest for yourself, right? So this is the first thing. And now that we understand what Clay is, let's talk about what Clay can actually do. And we talked about enriching the input, researching the input, generating personalized copy, and automating what you do to that input usually. So typically that means that don't try to reinvent the wheel and just use fancy AI prompting for no good reason. Ask people what is a high leverage task that they have been doing, what's actually delivering you a lot of value in return for your time, and just basically use Clay to automate that. It's not just, a simple import into Clay and AI will do something funky for you kind of situation. Because a lot of the time when I speak to prospects or I speak to students, that's what they expect it to be. They expect it to be like a chat GPT. You just import a file and then it just does all of this stuff to the leads. That's not going to happen, right? So that's the second thing of what Clay does for you. Now let's talk about use cases, because I think this is where a lot of people struggle, because simply put, a lot of the time they're working on use cases which are super niche, really granular, and they're not particularly scalable. So let's talk about some of the generic use cases, right? So typically, if you just import a bunch of people and companies into a Clay table, that's quite a big one. You may automate some manual research of people or companies, qualify the companies to see if they fit your ICP, pushing all of this data to another platform. I'm sure that's something that Marina, who runs Girls Who Clay, probably told you a lot about before, about updating your CRM and how you can sync your CRM with Clay and all that fun stuff. And then you can do account research, normalizing data, which is really an underrated, use case for Clay. And you can also help with old and missing data points. So keeping all of the contacts in your CRM, essentially in as up to date as possible. And above all, you can just rent some subscriptions that you don't own, for example, Build With, and basically use Clay to help you with inbound targeting, so form submissions, anonymous website visits, and so on. These are some of the generic use cases. The reason I'm saying this is because there are always one or two people attending these types of events, where webinars like this, where a lot of the time the actual use cases are the hardest thing for you to understand, right? And that's the first pillar of actually implementing Clay. Now, I'll also give away the slides after this webinar. I'll link them underneath the video if you're watching this underneath the video, if you're watching this inside of a video. And essentially, all it is just use cases by audience. I'm not going to touch on this too much, but basically there are a bunch of use cases for B2B. There are a bunch of use cases for B2C and direct-to-consumer audiences. There are also a lot for more creative and niche kind of workflows, which are typically kind of interview workflows. And I'm saying this because it's, yes, it shows your competence in understanding Clay, but for the most part, no one cares if you can't create a recipe book through Clay. Honestly, it doesn't make you a worse person. So that's that. And then finally, the end goal to remember with Clay is that it's just as simple as email sequencing, LinkedIn sequencing, adding the leads to a database, and that's basically it, right? So that's just the first gist of things. By now, I hope we understand what Clay is. So now it's about time to jump into Clay and other sales tools. So seeing how Clay integrates with your existing tech stack, right? So do we have any questions up to this point? Okay, no worries. So let's get going. So essentially, the first thing is, a lot of the time I get asked, hey, I paid for a Clay account. What other sales tools do I need to buy? Now, raise your hand if that was you when you just bought Clay. Relatable, right? So essentially, once again, for the 10th time, I'm showing you the same diagram here. But the point being that for the inputs and for the outputs, those are the only places where you need to buy a bunch of tools to replace those, right? And typically, once again, depending on, I'm not 100% sure about all of your use cases, but they will all fall into one of these three buckets. You're either using Clay for email automation, LinkedIn automation, or it's a custom, bespoke, it's complicated kind of use case, right? Either way, 99% of the time for cold emails, it's as simple as you getting a bunch of email domains. Don't ask me what providers to use. These are the ones on the screen, are the ones that I've used myself before. You have a bunch of email finders that you need to get. You probably just need to get 2 email finders realistically. The rest are an overkill simply because they will find you the same catch all emails. In other words, you don't want to basically spend a bunch of credits on providers only for them to find you an email which is unverifiable, right? And this is techie, this is nerdy. I don't want to get into like this whole debate about email finders, but the TLDR behind it is you need 2 email finders and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. That way, right? Then you need an email verification tool like Lead Magic. If you have a catch-all verifier as well, that'll be useful. Not that necessary, but once again, that would be useful. And on top of that, you need to basically just warm up your emails and send them from somewhere. 99% of the time, it will be Smart Lead Instantly, La Growth Machine, or Lemlist. Personally, from having used all 4 tools, I prefer Smart Lead and Instantly because they just do the job for emails better. Right, so that's as far as cold emails go. Do we have any questions up to this point? Okay, no questions? Excellent. So next up, let's talk about LinkedIn. With LinkedIn, in order to automate your LinkedIn outreach, all you need is LinkedIn Sales Navigator and HeyReach. You don't really need anything else. I'm sure you can replace HeyReach with a bunch of other tools as well. I'm not sure. There is one which is called Get Sales, I think, as well. But basically, they all would cost you around the same price, and they all do the same thing. I personally use HeyReach for the last 2 years, even before becoming proper affiliated with them. But once again, up to you. It's just a matter of using a LinkedIn automation tool and LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And on top of that, if you want to combine the email outreach and the LinkedIn outreach 2 in 1, you may use Lemlist and La Growth Machine, right? It's as simple as that. And the Clay is just the brain behind all of this. So as soon as you have the data from, I don't know, lists of people or companies that you want to contact via cold emails, Clay will be the one that basically does the research and you write the prompts and all of that fun stuff, right? But as far as the tools go, for cold emails is basically this. For LinkedIn is basically this. Don't really overcomplicate it. Of course, there are other things like you need to source the data somewhere. This can be another topic of conversation later down the line as well. But in a nutshell, this is as far as this goes. Now, at this moment in time, a lot of the time I get asked, why use other tools aside from Clay? Why would you bother saving Clay credits now that you spent $149 a month on all of this? And the answer is quite simple. Because if you look at the starter plan, for example, or let's say if you look at the Explorer plan, which should be $349 a month, that is it's basically 3 cents per Clay credit. Now for ChatGPT, you can get it 10 times cheaper if you just get the ChatGPT API directly. So essentially, there are a lot of times where there is a price arbitrage between what Clay charges you and between what you can get directly if you go to the provider. So for that reason, your top 5, your top 10 enrichments inside of Clay, I would recommend replacing. And at this moment in time, I will also later down the line, I'll show you how you can replace a bunch of these enrichments. In fact, I've prepared a guide, which I'll give away by the end of this video, and it will be linked underneath. But in a nutshell, what you need to know is you need to think about saving Clay credits, because otherwise you'll be broke. We run our whole agency on the $349 plan with 10,000 Clay credits. And we run it across over 10 clients every month, right? So my point being with this, that you don't need an expensive Clay plan. You don't need to spend Clay credits unless you're a huge organization that just doesn't want the kind of operational complexity of using different data providers and managing logins and stuff. Next up, I hope I drilled this into you. What Clay is, what sales tools you roughly need. I'll also give away a bunch of guides with all the sales tools and videos on how to use sales tools, all of the sales tools that I filmed, and so I'll share that with you later on in the video. In the meantime, let's talk about campaign strategy and the 5 steps that you need to know when creating a campaign strategy. First of all, the first thing that I always recommend is you need to know the 3 Ps. Now, the 3 Ps are the product, the persona that you're targeting with the product, and the pain points. Of course, if you're selling a service, just talk about the service, right? No biggie, no, not a big difference here. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're selling a clay course. For example, like in my case, where the goal of the product is to teach clay to a total newbie. Who's your persona? Your persona is probably going to be aspiring GTM advisors or GTM marketers, old school sales rep that realize that, company name and first name are not cutting it anymore in cold emails. And someone that follows some competitors like Eric Nowslowski or some other dude with a huge following that talks about cold emails. And their question is, how do I go from 0 to 1 so that I can understand how to build all these cool clay workflows, right? This is an example of how I think about campaign strategy. And that's just the first step. So the 3 Ps, the product, the persona we talked about, and the pain points. And the pain points are you have no idea how to scrape websites, no idea how to personalize sales messaging at scale. You probably spend a bunch of money on a clay license, which is a rookie move. And then you don't know how to save clay credits, and you wonder how to use clay with other mainstream tools like Smartlead and Hayreach. And for whatever reason, no one films these kind of tutorials, right? So that's the first step. You just talk about the 3 Ps, you list down everything that you know about the product, everything that you know about the persona, and everything about the pain points. This brings us super nicely into the second step, which is identifying the lead source. And if you identify the lead source, you're trying to figure out where do you source all of this data from. So let's say if you're targeting companies, you need a hit list of companies. If you're targeting people straight away, you need to source that list of people. This is when you need a custom GPT. You need to use a custom GPT. In my case, from everything that I've tried so far, there is nothing better than the Clay custom GPT or the Lock Clay custom GPT. And for those of you that may not be aware of how to use it, it's quite straightforward. When you're inside of ChatGPT, there is a section which is on the left side of the panel, which is called GPTs. If you type in Clay over there, you would notice the Clay GPT pop up over here. And this is my favorite GPT to ask any questions when it comes to things about Clay, the enrichments that Clay has, the kind of like, how would I find this inside of Clay, especially if it's a really niche thing like scraping the list, I don't know, like scraping a specific like ads library for, I don't know, some sort of ads, right? So that's the first GPT that I absolutely adore. The second GPT is the Unlock Clay GPT. Once again, I haven't publicly shared that this is even available to an average outsider of the course, but you can use this and you can see, well, some people rated it 4-star, which is, no biggie, but for the most part, it's got a lot of 5-star reviews, and it's basically intended for students that are part of our course, and a lot of the time, I got asked the exact same questions all the time. So what I did was I uploaded a bunch of transcripts from the course, everything that I know about Clay, and literally uploaded it so that you can ping it any question about Clay pretty much, specifically to do with like people lists, company lists, web scraping, and all that fun stuff. And it will basically answer to you how to do a specific thing inside of Clay. So for example, if I say, how do I scrape a list of restaurants, right? A big frustration of mine would be that I would have to ask this on the Clay Slack community, and a bunch of people will give me like really crap advice that's super niche. So for that reason, I just sat down and I spent absolute hours putting this GPT together. But what it does now is for most of the questions that you ask, it will give you an answer which, I will give you manually otherwise if you were to ask me this on WhatsApp. So in simple terms, here it says, hey, the best option is to probably use Outscraper. For more context, watch this video. You click on this video and spoiler alert, it will redirect to a video of me. And once again, this just opened in a new tab. Basically, just going to be, like a video of me talking about how to use Outscraper and Clay together. You also get a bunch of like affiliate links here as well. Like that's the quick disclaimer here that, I may benefit sometimes if you choose to use a specific tool because you get extended free trials and everything of that sort that I negotiated with the providers. And it even gives you the exact Clay table templates a lot of the time as well. So this is the second GPT that I absolutely want you to start using if you are to figure out how to use Clay more efficiently, right? So this GPT, in my opinion, is definitely worth trying out as well. And on top of that, there are 2 other GPTs, which I'll talk about later on. Specifically, this GPT prompt assistant for Clay, which is produced by coldlabs.ai, is one of the better ones that I found, specifically which helps you to create prompts for different types of AI models. So if that's something that you want to geek out on, by all means, try it out for yourself as well. Now, most of the campaigns that we have been running in the last couple of years and teaching for the last year or so has been all about outbound. So if you are doing outbound, the chances are the second step, as we just talked about, is identifying the lead source. And then step number 3 is typically mapping out the total addressable market. In other words, how big is the total data pool of people or companies that you want to reach out to? So that's the third step typically. And once again, you will need to use a bunch of tools which will be recommended by one of the GPTs in order to map out how big that total addressable market is, just so you can do the maths. Now, there are a couple of other things that I would love to touch on, but I don't really have enough time to do that. For example, with something as complicated as the total addressable market, you need to figure out the lapse maths. And what I mean by that is most of the time, before you start doing any sort of outreach, you need to understand the numbers that you require in order to convert a lead into an appointment, and an appointment into a proposal, and a proposal into a sale. In my opinion, that's non-negotiable, because until you understand the conversions between these numbers, and until you understand how many contacts you need to put into an automated chain of emails in order to get a positive reply, and then basically converts that positive reply into a meeting, and that meeting into a proposal, and that into a client, until you understand these conversions, it's highly unlikely that you will be hitting those numbers. Simply because a lot of the time, you can see, for example, in this case, one of the last proposals that we made was for someone where we needed to send 30,000, we needed to reach out to 30,000 people every month. For that, we need to send 90,000 emails every month, which requires at least 60 domains to do the outreach. And most of the time, most agencies, most freelancers, most companies would only be buying like 10 domains at a time, right? So until you put these numbers through to understand what the final outcome would be, assuming all of these conversions, it's highly unlikely that you will hit your targets when it comes to your outbound efforts with Clay. So for that reason, you always need to use this, like some sort of calculator like this, to just plug in the numbers. And in this case, let's say we're contacting 10,000 people every month, 3 emails each. We're going to be sending 30,000 emails per month. For that reason, we would need 20 domains and 60 inboxes. And in my opinion, this is a non-negotiable. We have a similar calculator for LinkedIn as well. I can give this one away as well. If you message me on LinkedIn, I'll happily send you the link to it. But essentially, you need to know this if you are to be successful, in my opinion, with implementing Clay for your business. You need to know the numbers before diving into the actual implementation. Next up, we will be talking about, after you map out the total addressable market, what you're going to do next, which is calculating the outreach volumes. And that's something that we just talked about to understand how many emails you need to send in order to hit a certain target of meetings and so on. And then step number 5, which is the most kind of common sense step, yet 99% of people don't do it for whatever reason, is drafting the email template. You should not enter Clay, and I'll honestly, I can tattoo that on my arm for all that I care, right? You should never enter Clay until you know the final email template that you're going to be sending out to the prospect. And once again, that's assuming that you do outbound as a service, right? Or you're implementing Clay to do outbound. And once again, in this case, we will probably wrap up the conversation at this point, because once again, I have a separate video which talks about drafting the email template and how you would do that in 5 steps in order to basically come up with your outbound campaign and implement it within Clay as well. So finally, now we got this far, and one other talking point that I really want to cover today is how to not waste Clay credits. Because Clay credits, we talked about the reasoning that you don't need to spend all of these credits, but essentially, one thing that I'm really fed up of with all the experts is whenever they show you the workflows when it comes to Clay, I find that most of the time they just use Clay credits, and it's just a really bad habit to get into, because before you know it, you're blowing thousands of dollars on tools, which you can get cheaper if you get them directly with the provider rather than, buying it via Clay, which basically has a huge markup to it. And essentially, there are 12 main things that I know how to replace inside of Clay, and which I believe everyone should be replacing inside of Clay. And those are things like OpenAI, Clayagent, email finding, email verification, scraping websites like Built with Crunchbase, PitchBook. You don't need to be spending Clay credits on those. You can also replace enrich person, enrich company, which is super common enrichments inside of Clay. Finding people and companies from Apollo, using export Apollo instead of Apollo. Once again, this talks about in this guide. And other things like if you want to use something like DeepSeek, you can do that for yourself as well. And you can see each one of those explanations comes with a video step-by-step tutorial, which is also a part of the course, which is Unlock Clay. But I love to give, parts of this away so that people can just get a taste of what the course is like. So for that reason, if you want to hang out with me and watch a bunch of videos, you can see some of them have like a crazy amount of views. I think my biggest one is like over 1,000 views of how to save Clay credits on like a specific tiny little micro hack. Just go check this out, because the chances are there are a couple of cost savings that you can make just through all of those. And to summarize this entire video so far, I think 99% of using clay is not about what button to press or what enrichment to use. It's more about finding a use case, making sure you have the right sales tools in place so that you don't worry about, oh, am I using the right tool here or here? You just need to have one stable sales, like list of sales tools, and just rely on that. Because I've been there, like in the last couple of years, where I switch from one sales tool to another, exhaust all the free trials and so on. And realistically, it just ends up with you getting worried about when your free trial expires rather than you getting genuine impact and genuine ROI through the sales tool. So if I were you, just go check out the guide on how to save clay credits, which will be linked right underneath the video. Go review the slides, which I will link underneath the video as well. And let me know if you have any questions with this. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, by all means, we are now up to almost 300 people that are inside of Unlock Clay. So if that's something that you want to take me up on, by all means, just check out unlockclay.com, which will be linked underneath this video as well. We have a separate course for recruiters, and we have a separate course for anyone that's looking to implement Clay as fast as possible for their business. All of this will be packaged inside of this course, which has been taken by over 300 happy students. And once again, check it out for yourself. It only costs £100 with a 100% money back guarantee for 30 days. What else can you ask for, right? Either way, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Make sure to check out the guides underneath, and I'll see you in the next one.